Everyone laughed when the poor boy touched the wild horse. Until the horse did the unthinkable. They mocked him for reaching toward a beast no one dared to stand near. But in the middle of the snowstorm that would soon swallow the valley, the boy and the wild horse shared a moment so strange, so impossible, that it would change every life in Cold River forever. And it all began with a single, trembling breath. The first snow of the season drifted over Cold River like a forgotten memory. Thin, quiet, unwilling to call attention to itself. Morning lay pale across the auction yard, where men in heavy coats and polished boots stood behind a wooden fence, as if guarding the very idea of wealth. Their breath pooled in the air like small clouds, their voices thick with the certainty of people who believed life would always bend their way. Some spoke about cattle prices, some about insurance claims after the last storm, some about new land deals. But all of them paused when the black horse was led into the ring. Ashfall. Even his name carried weight, as if the earth itself had whispered it. Two wranglers struggled to keep him between them. The chains rattled against the cold iron gates, sharp and unforgiving. Ashfall jerked once, twice, then rose higher than any man there expected, his front hooves slicing the air, scattering snow like shards of glass. The crowd roared with the uneasy thrill of people watching something beautiful destroy itself. Near the back of the crowd, pressed against the weathered boards of the fence, stood a thin boy in a frayed jacket. Noah Reed didn't speak. Words weren't much use in his world anyway. He simply watched, eyes wide but steady, as if he were trying to understand the horse the way one might study a storm. With awe, with fear, with a strange yearning for what it carried inside. Noah's gloves were too thin, and the cold bit through them. But he didn't pull his hands back. His palms stayed on the wood, as if the fence itself anchored him to the moment. Behind him, men chuckled at his appearance. Torn jeans, mud-worn shoes, a backpack hanging by one strap. "Shouldn't he be in school?" one man muttered. "Kids like that don't stay in school," another replied. "No future, no guidance, no financial security at home." Noah pretended not to hear. He had grown good at that. Inside the ring, Ashfall's eyes flashed like warm embers trapped in ice. He lunged, twisted, charged at shadows no one else could see. A wrangler stumbled backward into the fence, earning another round of laughter from the men. Their laughter was the kind that came easy to people who expected the world to be simple. Then it happened. Maybe it was instinct. Maybe the cold made Noah forget himself. Or maybe it was something older, something that rose quietly from deep within him, an ache looking for a place to land. He lifted his hand. Not high, not bold, just enough to let the air notice it. Something shifted in the ring. Ashfall's ears flicked forward. The great black head lowered a fraction, breath streaming from his nostrils in two soft plumes. The horse stilled. Not entirely, but enough to silence the yard for one impossible second. Snowflakes drifted between them like tiny lanterns. Noah held his breath. Ashfall exhaled. That was all. A single, quiet sound. But it pressed into the air with the weight of recognition. Like two wounded creatures acknowledging each other without knowing why. Then the spell broke. A bark of laughter erupted behind Noah, loud and cutting. More followed, until the whole line of men joined in. their amusement swelling like a tide. They weren't cruel, they just didn't know how else to respond to something they didn't understand. At the center of them stood Calder Hale. Tall, tailored coat, silver-threaded hair combed back sharply, the kind of man who controlled land, cattle, business meetings, even the weather if paperwork allowed it. He'd made his money through hard work and harder decisions, investment land deals, premium livestock lines, and a reputation that made banks trust him instantly. Calder's laugh was the loudest. "You think the horse picked you, boy?" he called out. "A poor kid with nothing? Don't flatter yourself." The yard echoed with the sound. Noah lowered his hand. The cold returned all at once, settling into his bones. He stepped back from the fence, swallowing the sting in his throat. Noah wasn't new to humiliation, but something about this moment pressed deeper, like the cold had found a crack in him. It never noticed before. Ashfall reared again, angry at the noise, angry at the chains, angry at a world that had never once been gentle to him. The wranglers fought to regain control, and Calder turned away, more interested in the price tag and how this wild million-dollar liability might be tamed. Noah took one last look at the horse. Just one. Ashfall's gaze flicked toward him. Not long, not meaningful, but enough to carve itself into the boy's memory. A gust of wind swept across the yard, carrying snow with it. Noah tightened his jacket and walked away, boots crunching in the frost. Behind him, the men resumed their business, talking about land values, winter feed costs, and the rising price of livestock insurance. But for Noah, nothing sounded the same anymore. What had happened wasn't magic. It wasn't destiny. It wasn't even a miracle. It was something quieter, something many adults forget. The moment two hurting souls recognize the shape of each other's wounds. As Noah reached the road leading out of the auction yard, he paused and looked back. Ashfall was gone from sight. But the feeling lingered. Not hope. Not yet. Just a question. A question that settled in Noah's chest the way snow settles on a field. Soft, cold, and stubborn. Why did the wild horse stop for me? Noah didn't have the answer, but the road home stretched long and lonely before him, and for the first time in a long while, he didn't mind the walk. The road home stretched beneath Noah like a long gray ribbon, and the snow along its edges had thinned by the time he reached the crooked house at the town's far border. The structure leaned slightly to one side, as if years of wind had persuaded it to surrender. The porch sagged, the screen door clattered in the breeze, and the single window glowed faintly, though Noah knew it was only the kitchen bulb, dim, flickering, and long overdue for replacement. He paused at the steps, letting the cold linger on his cheeks. The last thing he had seen at the auction yard was Ashfall's brief glance, a flicker that refused to settle. It followed him like a whisper he couldn't quite interpret. He exhaled, the mist rising from his lips fading into the shape of a question that had no answer. Then he pushed open the door. Inside, the house greeted him with the smell of stale heat and leftover alcohol. His father sat hunched at the kitchen table, shoulders collapsed inward like a man trying to fold himself away from the world. A half-empty bottle rested near his elbow. His hands, once strong enough to lift hay bales and work the ranches around Cold River, now trembled when he reached for the glass. "You're late," his father muttered, though his voice carried no anger, only exhaustion. "I was just walking home," Noah replied softly. His father didn't ask from where. He seldom did. The man had long stopped expecting explanations for anything, even from himself. Noah hung his jacket on a chair, the fabric damp with snow, and moved quietly around the kitchen. He'd learned the art of silence long before he learned multiplication. Silence kept peace. Silence kept the house from shattering into arguments that never healed. On the counter sat the same chipped plate from that morning. Rabbits printed along the rim were almost rubbed off by time. Noah opened the fridge and found a half loaf of bread and 2 eggs. He cracked one into a pan, watching it sizzle weakly in the too thin layer of oil. Beside him, the old wall clock ticked in uneven beats, like a failing heart. He ate, standing up. Across the room, the dog, Grady, old and loyal, lay curled near the wood stove, his fur patchy but warm to the touch. When Noah crouched to stroke him, Grady lifted his head and pressed his muzzle into the boy's palm, an unspoken welcome that made Noah's throat tighten. He didn't want to think about Ashfall. He didn't want to remember how the men laughed, how Calder's voice cut through the cold like a blade. But the memory kept circling back, slow and insistent, like a tide that refused to recede. The moment the wild horse stopped, truly stopped, had felt like standing in the eye of a storm he didn't know he'd been living inside. His father rose unsteadily and reached for the coat he kept by the door. "Where are you going?" Noah asked. "Town," the man said. "Job board closes early tonight." But Noah knew that wasn't true. The job board stayed open until 7, and it wasn't even 4 yet. Still, he didn't question it. His father needed dignity where he could find it, even in small lies. After the door shut, Noah stood alone in the kitchen. The quiet deepened, stretching through the house. It wasn't peaceful silence. It was the kind that reminded him no one was coming to fill it. In the living room, a small wooden chest sat beneath the window. Inside were the few things his mother left behind: a scarf, a silver ring, and a letter she wrote the night she walked away. The envelope had grown soft at the edges from being opened too many times. Noah lifted it gently, as if afraid it might crumble. He didn't read the letter anymore. The words were already burned into him. "This isn't your fault. You're a good boy. I just can't stay in this house." He folded it back, hand steady though his breath wasn't. He didn't know why Ashfall's eyes felt familiar. But maybe pain recognizes pain, even across species. Maybe the wild horse had looked at him the way he once looked at his mother's retreating shadow. Confused, afraid, hoping for something soft that never came. Snowflakes brushed against the window pane, delicate as dust. Noah slipped on his shoes again and stepped out the back door, following the narrow trail behind the house that led to the field. The land stretched quiet under the fading daylight, the horizon blurred where the snow met the sky. He walked until the house looked small behind him, then sat on an overturned bucket near the fence line. From here, he could see the distant barns of Calder Hale's ranch, a cluster of dark shapes against the pale landscape. Even though the distance was more than a mile, Noah imagined he could still hear the faint jangle of Ashfall's chains carried by the wind. A sense of heaviness settled into his chest. But it wasn't despair. It was something softer, something like readiness. The early stirring of personal resilience, the quiet seed of emotional recovery forming in the cold soil of his childhood. He didn't know Calder. He didn't know the world of powerful men in tailored coats who made decisions without ever seeing the people they affected. But he knew one thing. Whatever stood between him and that horse, it wouldn't be enough to keep him away forever. Even if he didn't understand the bond, even if the world laughed at it, Noah felt the pull of something he couldn't name. A soft crack of ice split somewhere in the field. A crow lifted from a fence post and flew toward the ranch. Noah watched until it became a speck. He pulled his jacket tighter, stood, and walked back toward the house, the place that sheltered him, but never warmed him. He paused at the back door, glancing once more at the far-off barns. He didn't know when he would go back, only that he would. And when he did, the world would not be the same. Noah barely slept that night. It wasn't the cold or the rattling of the loose gutter outside his window. It was the memory of Ashfall's eyes. Dark, restless, and strange in a way that tugged at something he couldn't name. When dawn finally slipped through the thin curtains, he felt as if he had only drifted through a long, muted dream. The day began quietly, as most days in Cold River did, but a steady pull deep inside him seemed to guide every one of his steps. By late afternoon, when his father still hadn't returned from town, Noah knew he needed air, and perhaps something steadier than the silence filling the house. He slipped out the back door, the wind cutting gently at his face, and followed the same narrow path toward the field. But this time, he didn't stop at the fence line. He kept walking, boots crunching in patches of leftover frost, until the land rose gently beneath him, and the distant barns of Calder Hale's ranch came into full view. The ranch looked different in the fading light. Quieter, less imposing. The snow on the rooftops glowed faintly gold, as if the sun were trying to offer some small apology for the cold it left behind. Noah hesitated. He wasn't sure if he was trespassing. But something told him that if he turned back now, the question sitting heavily in his chest would never let him rest. He approached the outer fence. The boards were thick, old, worn smooth by years of weather and horses brushing against them. His fingers rested on the top rail, and for a moment he simply listened. Far off, he heard the soft thud of hooves, the muted clink of metal tools in the workshop, and the low murmur of voices drifting from the main barn. Then came a sound he recognized instantly. A restless, uneven snort. A stomp against the wooden floor. The unmistakable rhythm of agitation. Ashfall. Noah slipped through a gap in the fence, careful to stay close to the shadows cast by the barns. The evening had settled into the kind of quiet that made every movement feel larger, more hazardous, though he couldn't explain why. He didn't know the rules of a place like this, what lines could be crossed, what lines couldn't. But his feet carried him forward anyway, each step firm with a sense of mental clarity he rarely felt at home. Emma appeared from around the corner of the workshop, wiping her hands on a cloth already stained with soot. She startled when she saw him. "Noah? What are you doing here?" she whispered. He hesitated, unsure how to explain something he barely understood himself. "I just wanted to see if he's okay." Emma studied him for a moment, her breath forming small clouds. She was the sort of person who read more than words, someone who paid attention to what lingered in a person's eyes. Finally, she nodded. "Come on, but stay close. If Calder sees you here without asking, he won't like it." They moved along the back of the barn, the boards groaning softly as the cold settled in. Emma led him to a side door weathered by seasons of wind. She eased it open just enough for them to slip inside. Warmth hit Noah's face first. Not the cozy kind found in friendly homes, but the rough animal heat of a stable filled with living bodies. The air was dense, with the scent of hay, sweat, and something older, something wild. The horses were quiet tonight. Their breaths rose like gentle steam into the lantern-lit darkness. Hooves shifted softly in straw. Leather straps creaked. A few turned their heads as the children walked by, ears twitching with curiosity. And then, in the far stall, stood Ashfall. The stall was larger than the others, reinforced with extra boards and iron latches. The chains that held him earlier were gone, replaced with a thick rope tied loosely to the side ring. It didn't look like restraint. It looked like precaution. Ashfall paced slowly inside the stall, his muscles rippling beneath his coat as he turned. When he saw Noah, he stopped. His head lifted, the breath from his nostrils curling into the light like smoke. "You shouldn't get too close," Emma murmured. "He's calmer now, but Calder says he's unpredictable." Noah nodded, but he didn't step back. Something about the dim light and Ashfall's stillness softened the edge of fear that should have been there. Noah moved closer, stopping just outside the stall where the wooden post met the door. His hands were steady, though he didn't realize it. Ashfall lowered his head a little, just enough for the lantern light to catch in his eyes. They weren't wild now. They were watchful, searching, almost wary, but not harsh. "He remembers you," Emma whispered, surprised by her own words. Noah didn't answer. He wasn't sure if remembering was the right word. But the air between them felt familiar, like a quiet corner of a room where two people had once cried separately without knowing the other was there. He lifted his hand, not to touch, only to let Ashfall see it. The same gesture from the auction yard, but softer this time, free of the noise and cruelty that had mocked it before. Ashfall's ears flicked forward, his nostrils flared gently. He stepped closer, each movement slow enough that Noah felt the careful intention behind it. Emma watched them with widened eyes, hardly breathing. Ashfall's muzzle hovered inches from Noah's palm, warm breath washing over his skin. Noah's fingertips tingled. He didn't move. He simply stood there, his entire being quieting into a single, steady moment of emotional well-being. A balance he seldom felt anywhere else in his life. A soft groan sounded somewhere in the barn. A horse shifted. A lantern flickered. Then Ashfall nudged Noah's hand. Not roughly, not with warning, but with something that felt like a question. Noah's heart tightened in his chest, and he swallowed quietly. The stable door at the far end clattered suddenly. Heavy footsteps entered, measured, confident, unmistakable. Emma's eyes widened with fear. "It's Calder," she breathed. "You need to—" But she didn't finish because the footsteps grew louder, drawing closer with every beat. Noah froze, the warmth of Ashfall's breath still lingering on his palm. The stable seemed to hold its breath with him, and in that stretched, fragile silence, the barn door creaked open wider. The barn door groaned wider, and the lantern light trembled as a cold gust slipped inside. Calder Hale stepped through the shadows with the kind of presence that made even the horses lift their heads. His boots thudded against the wooden floor in slow, deliberate strides. Emma stiffened. Noah didn't move. Ashfall stayed close, silent but alert, as if sensing a shift in the air. Calder's gaze swept across the stalls before landing on the two children. His eyes narrowed, not in anger at first, but in calculation. the way a man evaluates a situation before deciding whether it threatens anything he owns. He took 2 more steps, the floor creaking under his weight. "What," he said, voice low and steady, "are you doing in my stable?" Emma opened her mouth, then closed it. Noah felt her hand tense beside him. He stepped forward slightly, not enough to challenge Calder, but enough to take responsibility. "I just came to see him," Noah said quietly. "Him?" Calder echoed. He tilted his head toward Ashfall. "This horse isn't a pet. He's dangerous. And you?" His eyes ran over Noah's thin frame, the patched jacket, boots worn down at the heels. "You shouldn't be here at all." Noah swallowed, but he didn't drop his gaze. "I wasn't trying to cause trouble." Calder's jaw worked, tightening once. "Then you'll leave now. Both of you." Emma tugged at Noah's sleeve, urging him back, but Ashfall suddenly shifted forward, letting out a low, vibrating breath that rolled through the stall like a warning. Calder's hand moved instinctively toward the rope looped near the door, but when he saw Noah raise his palm, slow, steady, he paused. What happened next wasn't dramatic. It wasn't loud. It wasn't the kind of moment people gather around campfires to tell. It was quieter than that. Ashfall lowered his head, not in submission, not in fear, but as though meeting the stillness in Noah's hand. Calder's breath caught, not quite a gasp, but the small, startled intake of someone who sees something they've already decided is impossible. He stared for several seconds, eyes flicking between boy and horse. "How are you doing that?" he asked, voice dropped to a rough whisper. "I'm not doing anything," Noah said. "He just lets me be here." Calder stepped closer, eyes narrowing again, but this time with something more complicated than suspicion. "He doesn't let anyone be near him," he said. "Not since—" He stopped. Whatever memory rose in him, he shoved it back down like a man practiced at burying things. He straightened, his shoulders, the authority returning. "You need to go," he said firmly. "I won't say it again." Emma gently nudged Noah toward the door. Noah took 1 step back, but before he could turn away, Ashfall pushed his muzzle against the stall door, sending a dull thud through the barn. Not angry, just insistent, almost reluctant. Noah's fingers curled, aching with the urge to touch the warm curve of the horse's neck again. But he didn't. He only whispered, "I'll come back." Whether he meant it for Ashfall or for himself, he wasn't sure. Outside, the cold evening wrapped around them like a veil. Emma exhaled shakily, pulling her coat tighter. "You shouldn't push your luck," she said, though her voice held no real scolding. "Calder's strict, but he isn't heartless. He just has rules." Noah nodded, though his thoughts were still tangled around the moment in the stall. Why does he keep Ashfall if he thinks the horse is dangerous? Emma hesitated. "Because he doesn't know what else to do with him," she said softly. Ashfall was supposed to be trained for the Hale Ranch line, a showpiece. But when his last trainer got hurt, Calder said he'd take responsibility. "Hurt how?" Noah asked. Emma looked down at the snow-covered ground. "Badly. But it wasn't Ashfall's fault. People forget that." They walked toward the outer fence together, their breaths trailing behind them in misty ribbons. The ranch glowed faintly under the early evening sky, the lights in the main house turning on one by one like a line of weary fireflies. "Come on," Emma said. "I'll show you a shortcut back to town." But Noah lingered a moment longer, glancing back toward the barn. He couldn't see Ashfall, but he could feel the echo of the horse's presence in the cold air. The stillness around the ranch felt different now, as if a small, invisible thread had tied itself between them. When they reached the edge of the field, Noah stopped again. Emma looked at him curiously. "I think he's scared," Noah murmured. "Most wild horses are," she said. "No," Noah said gently. "Not scared of people. Scared of something else." Emma didn't argue. Some things didn't need explanations. Some instincts were too quiet, too old, too honest to question. They parted ways near the road, and Noah walked the rest of the distance alone. The sky above him deepened to indigo, stars scattered faintly like powdered ice. The solitude didn't weigh on him tonight the way it usually did. A small warmth, thin, fragile, but real, rested somewhere beneath his ribs. It wasn't hope, not exactly, more like anticipation. The kind that comes when a person senses the future shifting, even if they can't see where it's headed. Noah stepped onto the porch of his house and looked once more toward the ranch in the distance. A single barn lantern flickered like a heartbeat. He whispered into the cold, "I'll come back," as if the wind itself might carry the promise. Inside, the house felt less heavy somehow. Not warmer, Noah would never call it warm, but less hollow. As though the night had left room for a possibility he didn't dare name. He went to bed with his clothes still smelling faintly of hay and dust, and for the first time in months he fell asleep quickly, his mind gently tucked into the calm that follows emotional connection. In the quiet that wrapped around him, even the shadows on his walls felt softer. Morning broke slow and colorless, the kind of pale winter light that seemed unsure of its own purpose. Noah woke before the old alarm clock buzzed, though he let it ring anyway. Its faint, tinny rattle filled the small room, rattling something inside him that hadn't shaken for a long time. Maybe it was last night's promise echoing back. Maybe it was the warmth he felt standing in front of Ashfall. Or maybe it was the quiet sense that something had shifted. Subtly, but enough to tilt the horizon. His father was still asleep on the couch, arm thrown over his face, boots half off. The television murmured weakly to itself, a late-night ad looping about financial hope and building a more secure tomorrow. Noah switched it off, careful not to wake him. The silence that followed was softer than usual. After feeding Grady, Noah grabbed his coat and stepped into the cold. Frost bit at the ground like a million tiny needles, and the air smelled faintly of wood smoke drifting from distant chimneys. The town was just beginning to stir, but Noah wasn't headed toward town. He walked the opposite way, toward the edge of the fields, toward the ranch. He didn't know if he planned on seeing Ashfall again so soon. Maybe it was foolish. Maybe it was dangerous. But logic didn't always matter when something in your chest pulled you forward. The pasture behind the Hale property stretched wide and quiet, bordered by fences that had stood longer than Noah had been alive. The world felt older here, as if the land carried memories the wind refused to let go. Noah paused near a gate, his breath floating gently in front of him. Every step he'd taken since waking seemed to have an aim he hadn't fully admitted. A soft voice startled him. "You're back early." Emma stood a few feet away, her braid half tucked into her jacket collar, a small hammer hanging from her belt. She looked like she had already been up for hours. "I just needed some air," Noah said. She gave him a knowing look. "Air, huh?" He didn't answer. She didn't press. Emma motioned for him to follow. "Come on, I'll show you the lower stables. My dad's fixing some of the stalls there, and I'm helping." The lower stables were older than the main barn. Lower ceilings, cracked beams, the kind of place time had worn down but not given up on. Inside, several retired horses stood quietly, their heads dipping as if bowing to a rhythm only they understood. These curs are the ones nobody has much use for anymore, Emma said. Dad says every horse deserves dignity, even if they can't work the fields. Noah approached an old chestnut mare. Her eyes were cloudy, her movements slow, but she nudged his sleeve gently with a warmth that surprised him. He brushed his hand along her cheek, feeling the roughness of her coat, the gentle tremble beneath her skin. She leaned into the touch as if she had waited months for someone to notice her. You're good with them, Emma said. All of them. Not just him. Noah didn't know what to say. Compliments always sat strangely on him, like clothes borrowed from someone larger. It's not something you learn, she went on. It's something you already have. He shrugged. I just feel calmer around them. Emma nodded with surprising seriousness. Horses do that. They don't care about money or mistakes or who left or who stayed. They just see you. She paused, studying him. Sometimes better than humans do. Noah looked away, throat tightening. They spent the next hour cleaning stalls and filling water buckets. The work was simple, steady, enough to quiet the noisy corners of the mind. Noah found a kind of emotional balance in the rhythm. The scrape of the shovel, the soft thud of hay, the slow, calming breath of the horses. When the sun lifted higher, casting a warmer light through the slats of the roof, Emma's father entered. A sturdy man with soot-stained hands and kind eyes, he gave Noah a nod that wasn't quite approval, but wasn't judgment either. You here to help? He asked. If you need it, Noah said. We always need an extra pair of hands, the man replied. They worked together for a while. Then, as Emma's father stepped outside to fetch tools, Emma leaned closer. I heard Calder talking this morning, she whispered. He's planning something for Ashfall, something he's not telling the ranch hands. Noah stiffened. What kind of something? I don't know, she admitted. But he sounded tired, like someone carrying a burden too heavy for one man. She hesitated. He doesn't even let the trainers near Ashfall anymore. Noah's heartbeat quickened. Why? Because Ashfall reminds him of someone he lost, she said softly. Someone important. The words hung in the air, thin and fragile. Noah didn't ask more. He wasn't sure he needed the details yet. Pain had its own language, quiet, complicated, and not always ready to be spoken aloud. A sudden clang echoed from the main barn area. Emma jumped slightly. That's Dad, she said with a small laugh. He drops things when he gets frustrated. Noah exhaled, letting the tension ease a little. But the worry stayed with him, the way a shadow stretches longer when the sun starts to fall. They finished the chores, and Emma walked Noah partway back toward the main fence. The snow around them shimmered with late morning light, every flake catching the sun like a tiny mirror. You coming back tomorrow? She asked. Noah hesitated. Not because he didn't want to, but because he wasn't sure he should. There was a fine line between being needed and being in the way. I'll try, he said. Emma grinned. Good. Ashfall will notice if you don't. He felt a flutter in his chest, half fear, half something softer. How do you know? Because, she said as she opened the gate, he's already picked you. Noah started walking home, the cold fresh against his face. In the distance, the ranch lay still, dusted in sunlight, holding its secrets in the spaces between barns and brittle fences. Whatever bond existed between him and Ashfall, it wasn't just a fleeting moment in a crowded yard. It was deeper than that, older than the laughter of men, stronger than pride or fear. Something in the horse's past reached toward something in his own, as if their wounds recognized each other's shape. Noah didn't know what Calder planned. He didn't know what tomorrow would bring. But he knew one truth. He was not done with Ashfall, and Ashfall wasn't done with him. The next morning arrived with a strange pressure in the air, as if the sky itself were holding its breath. Noah felt it the moment he stepped outside. The quiet that wasn't peaceful, the wind that wasn't cold enough to bite yet, but carried a warning. Clouds clustered low over the mountains, gathering weight. Grady stayed near the porch, tail motionless, his old instincts stirred by something humans rarely sensed in time. Noah tightened his jacket and began the long walk toward the ranch. The ground crunched under his boots, but there was a softness to the snow today, a looseness that hinted at change. He kept replaying Emma's words. "He's already picked you," as if they were a secret he wasn't sure he deserved. Each step pulled him forward, not with urgency, but with a quiet purpose, an emotional grounding he hadn't felt in years. As he approached the outer fields, he saw Emma running toward him, her braid swinging behind her like a dark ribbon. "Noah!" she called, breath visible in the cold. "You need to come. Something's happening." "What is it?" he asked, quickening his pace. "It's Calder and Ashfall. He's making a decision." They hurried across the pasture, their feet slipping over patches of wet ice. The sky deepened from gray to steel blue, the kind of shade that made the world look older and heavier. The wind picked up, rattling fencing wire and fluttering loose shingles on the workshop roof. The horses in the lower stables shifted anxiously, their ears flicking toward the mountains where thunder grumbled like a distant warning. Inside the main barn, several ranch hands stood around Ashfall's stall. Calder was there too, arms crossed, jaw tight. His face looked carved from something colder than stone. "What's going on?" Emma demanded. Calder didn't look at her first. He looked at Noah. "We're running out of time," he said flatly. "And out of options." Noah stepped closer, heart thudding. "What does that mean?" "It means," Calder said, "that this horse is a liability, a danger. And winter storms are coming. I can't risk more accidents. Not again." The barn creaked under a new gust of wind, snow dust sifting through the rafters like falling ash. One of the ranch hands whispered something about checking the generator, something about home insurance not covering livestock losses during electrical failures, but the words barely registered. All Noah heard was the tremor in Calder's voice, a tremor he tried to bury beneath authority. "You're going to get rid of him," Noah said quietly. Calder stiffened. "I didn't say that." "You didn't have to." Ashfall tossed his head, rope pulling taut as he shifted restlessly. The tension in the air spread through him like electricity. His breath came fast, clouds forming and disappearing in jagged bursts. Noah could see the fear underneath the agitation, fear that spread through the stall like a living thing. "Calder," Emma's father said gently, "there might be another way." Calder shook his head. "I've tried every way." He turned toward the stall, his shoulders heavy. "This isn't about pride, it's about safety." Noah stepped forward before he could stop himself. Ashfall stilled at the movement, leaning subtly toward the boards, drawn to Noah's presence like a forgotten memory returning. "You haven't tried my way," Noah said, voice barely above a whisper, but somehow cutting through the barn. Calder stared at him, incredulous. "Your way? You're a child." "I know," Noah said steadily. "But he listens to me." Calder took a step closer, looming over him, but Noah didn't move. The wind pushed against the barn walls, snow drifting in through the gaps like cold breath. "You think you understand this horse," Calder said, voice thickening. "You think standing near him without getting hurt means something." He looked at Ashfall again, something flickering in his eyes. Grief, regret, a memory trying to rise. "You weren't here when my son—" He stopped. Everyone froze. Only the wind moved. Emma took a step back. Emma's father lowered his gaze. The ranch hands shifted uneasily, as if they had stepped into a room where a sacred truth had been accidentally revealed. Calder inhaled sharply, turning away. "I won't talk about this." But Noah already understood. Maybe not the details. Maybe not the depth. But he knew the shape of loss when he heard it. Loss had its own edges, its own quiet weight. The lights flickered as thunder cracked above the mountains, closer now. The storm had gathered full force, its clouds rolling like dark waves across the sky. Emma looked nervously at the rafters. "We should get the horses inside before the wind picks up more." Calder nodded, but his attention lingered on Ashfall, on Noah, on the impossible thread between them. "Noah," he said finally, voice low and rough, "if you think you can calm him, then show me." Noah felt the barn tilt around him, not physically, but in meaning. Everything in him stilled, tightening like a string pulled taut. Ashfall watched him through the dim light, ears flicked forward, body trembling in a way that wasn't anger, but unease. Noah stepped closer, slowly, letting each breath guide him. The barn dimmed for a moment as the storm darkened the sky, heavy shadows falling over the straw-covered floor. Ashfall's muscles tensed. Noah raised his hand. Not too high, not too fast. "Ashfall," he whispered. It wasn't the word that mattered. It was the space between the word and the breath behind it. Ashfall lowered his head an inch, then another. The barn went silent. Even the storm paused. Noah moved his hand forward until the distance between them narrowed to a thin slice of winter air. Ashfall's nose brushed his fingers, light, tentative, soft as apology. The connection held. A bond in the middle of a storm. Calder exhaled, the sound breaking like something inside him had cracked open. "How?" But before anyone could speak more, the wind slammed hard against the barn, rattling the doors, sending a gasp through every horse inside. A gust tore through a loose panel, scattering hay and dust into the air. "We need to secure everything before the storm hits full force," Emma's father shouted. Calder turned sharply. "Everyone to your stations." The barn erupted into motion, but Noah stayed beside Ashfall, and Ashfall stayed beside him, not moving, not panicked, just choosing him. The storm outside raged louder, but inside the stall, for one fragile moment, the world narrowed to a boy and a horse breathing in the same rhythm, as if bracing for something neither could yet see, but both somehow sensed was coming. The storm came down with a force that felt almost personal, as if the sky had finally decided to let loose everything it had been holding back. Wind howled across the ranch, bending the trees until their branches bowed low, scattering snow in wild spirals. The temperature dropped sharply, and the fields blurred into a single sweep of white. Inside the barn, The rush to secure everything happened in frantic silence. Men tightening ropes, slamming shutters, hauling bales of hay away from the draft lines. Calder barked orders, but his voice strained at the edges, the sound of a man remembering too much. Emma's father hurried toward the generator, muttering about keeping the heaters on before the pipes froze. But Ashfall didn't move. Not while Noah was there. Not while the storm clawed at the walls. Noah kept his hand near the horse's muzzle, breathing slowly, grounding both of them in a rhythm he barely understood. Ashfall's trembling lessened, the fear still there but contained, as if the storm outside echoed a different storm inside his chest. A loud crack split the air, something heavy collapsing outside. The barn doors shuddered violently, bolts loosening under the strain. Calder cursed under his breath and motioned for two men to brace the entrance. "Noah!" Emma shouted over the wind. "You need to get away from him. He'll spook if the doors give." But Ashfall wasn't spooking. His attention stayed locked on Noah, his breath warm against the boy's chilled fingers. Then a second crack. Louder. Closer. Snow burst inward through a gap in the siding, followed by a gust fierce enough to extinguish one of the lanterns. The barn dimmed, shadows shifting like restless spirits. Several horses reared in their stalls, hooves striking wood. Ashfall jerked his head sharply, eyes going wide with panic he could no longer contain. "No, easy, easy," Noah whispered, stepping closer. The floor vibrated under his boots as the wind pounded again. Calder saw the shift in Ashfall's posture. "Get away from him, Noah!" But Noah didn't move. He knew, somehow, that if he stepped back now, something inside Ashfall would splinter the way ice breaks under weight. The rope snapped, a clean, sharp release. Ashfall lunged forward, not at Noah, but toward the far end of the barn where the noise was worst. His shoulder hit the stall door hard, sending it swinging open. Men shouted. Emma gasped. Calder cursed. Then another blast of wind tore through the upper rafters, sending a sheet of ice crashing to the ground near Ashfall's hooves. The horse bolted, straight out into the storm. "No!" Calder roared. "Don't open that gate! Let him run out the back! Noah, get away from there!" But Noah was already sprinting. The cold hit him like a wall the instant he stepped outside, wind slicing his face, snow stinging his eyes. He could barely see Ashfall's silhouette veering toward the ridge, black against the swirling white. Noah called after him, voice ripped away by the gale. He slipped once, catching himself on his palms. The ice burned, his lungs ached with each breath, but he kept going. Thunder rolled across the valley. Lightning flickered. The world shrank into a shifting blur of white and shadow. "Noah," Emma's voice faintly echoed behind him. "Come back! It's too dangerous!" But the boy didn't stop. Ashfall was stumbling now, not running, fear and disorientation steering him toward the narrow ravine that cut through the hillside. Noah knew that place. Everyone in town did. Snow collected there in deep drifts, hiding rocks and holes big enough to break a leg, horse or human. "Please," Noah whispered, forcing his legs to push harder. "Please don't go down there." The storm muffled everything. Even his own heartbeat felt distant. He finally caught sight of Ashfall at the edge of the ravine. The horse's chest heaved, vapor pouring from him. In frantic bursts, his hooves skidded on the ice-crusted ground. One wrong step, one moment of lost balance, and Ashfall slipped. A short, desperate cry tore from him as his front leg plunged between two buried rocks. He dropped to one knee, trembling violently, snow spraying up around him like white dust. "No, no, no!" Noah slid the last few feet, almost falling as he dropped beside the horse. Ashfall's breath came in ragged bursts, his eyes wild with pain. His muscles convulsed under the strain. Noah touched his neck, not to soothe, not to command, but simply to tell him, "You're not alone." "It's okay," Noah whispered, voice shaking. "I'm here. I'm not leaving." Ashfall's head lowered until his forehead pressed briefly against Noah's shoulder, a gesture not of calm, but desperation. This was R1. Pain meeting pain. Human and horse unable to hide from the storm outside or the storms inside themselves. Thunder cracked again, lighting the sky with a flash that revealed the depth of the ravine below them. Noah felt his stomach turn. If Ashfall thrashed, the horse could break his leg entirely or fall deeper. "Easy, buddy," Noah murmured, running a hand down Ashfall's trembling face. "I know it hurts. I know." Ashfall let out a deep, guttural sound, a sound that wasn't anger or fear, but something rawer, something older, the sound of a creature who had learned suffering too young. Noah swallowed hard, tears stinging his eyes. "I know that feeling too." He remembered holding his mother's letter in the kitchen, remembered the way grief had seized his chest without warning, remembered the nights he felt the world closing inward. The child version of a pain adults sometimes hired an injury attorney for, except no broken bone could explain this kind of hurt. Snow piled around them, wind screaming like 1,000 unresolved memories. But in the middle of it all, Noah stayed. And Ashfall, despite the agony, didn't thrash, didn't fight, didn't pull away. They were two wounded beings pressed against the edge of the world, sharing one fragile breath at a time. "Noah!" That voice, Calder's, cut through the storm at last. Noah didn't turn. He kept his forehead against Ashfall's, whispering into the horse's winter-cooled mane, "It's okay. Help is coming. I've got you." For the first time since the storm began, Ashfall stopped trembling. He simply breathed slow and heavy, letting Noah carry the weight of the moment for both of them. Calder's shout cut through the blizzard again, closer this time. Strained with fear, he didn't bother hiding. He stumbled through the curtain of snow, Emma and 2 ranch hands behind him, lanterns flickering wildly in the wind. Their boots crunched toward the ravine, their silhouettes bending against the gale, their breaths torn away faster than the light could warm them. When Calder saw Noah kneeling beside Ashfall, hands gentle, face pale, jacket plastered to his skin, he froze. Not because of the danger, not because the storm roared around them like a living creature, but because the scene, lit by distorted flashes of lightning, resembled a memory he had spent years trying to bury. A boy, a horse, snow, and a moment too late to fix. Calder's throat tightened. He didn't call Noah's name again. He didn't trust his voice not to break. Emma slid down the slope first, nearly falling as the ground shifted beneath the drifts. She reached Noah and put a hand on his shoulder. But he didn't look at her. His eyes were fixed entirely on Ashfall. "He's stuck," Noah said, breath trembling but sure. "If he tries to pull free, the leg will break." Calder swallowed. The ranch hands exchanged looks, silently calculating options. None of them good. The storm worsened, snow battering them sideways. The lantern light flickered dangerously, shadows stretching and shrinking with every gust. "We can't leave him out here," Emma said, wiping snow from her face. "And we can't move him wrong," one of the hands added. "He's too big. We'll need tools, ropes, God knows what else." "There's no time," Noah whispered. "He's freezing." Ashfall let out a low, guttural sound, one that vibrated through Noah's bones. The horse's eyes were wide, but something in them softened when Noah pressed his forehead gently against his cheek. "I know," Noah murmured. "I know it hurts." Calder finally found his voice. "We could call for help," he said, though he knew the storm had eaten the radio lines alive. "Or get the vet, someone with experience, someone who knows the laws about liability." He said it as if legal advice would somehow protect a living creature from the cold. But Noah shook his head. "He doesn't need a vet right now." He looked up, snow clinging to his lashes. "He needs to trust." Ashfall shifted again, a rough, pained motion that forced him deeper into the trap of stones. He cried out, a raw, heavy sound that sliced through the wind. Noah didn't flinch. He just held the horse's face and whispered, "Easy. Let me help." The others watched, not sure whether to intervene or let the impossible continue unfolding. Calder stepped forward, voice lowering. "Noah, listen carefully. If he moves wrong, he won't," Noah said quietly. Lightning flashed, illuminating his face, revealing a steadiness far older than his years. "How do you know?" Calder demanded, snow collecting in the lines of his coat. "Because he's listening to me." Calder stared. And for the first time since his son's accident, the man allowed himself to believe. Just a crack, just enough for a thread of doubt to let in something softer. Another thunderclap. The wind screamed. Snow spun in vicious spirals across the ravine. The world seemed to shrink, tightening around the boy and the wounded horse. "Noah," Emma whispered. "What are you doing?" "Something I have to," he said. He placed both hands on Ashfall's neck, not pushing, not pulling, just grounding him, matching breath for breath, two rhythms becoming one. Then Noah leaned close to Ashfall's ear. "You and me," he whispered. "We move together." Ashfall's ears flicked. His trembling slowed, not gone, but controlled, as though the storm between them quieted even as the sky above roared louder. "Noah," Calder warned, but softer this time, as if unsure which part of himself was speaking. The boy shifted downward, crawling toward the trapped leg. The ranch hands shouted in protest, but Calder lifted a hand, stopping them. His jaw clenched, breath sharp, eyes locked on the boy. Noah cleared the snow around Ashfall's leg, his fingers numb, but determined. He exposed the edges of the rocks, the hidden gap where the leg had fallen. The moment he touched the stone, Ashfall jerked, but Noah pressed his forehead to the horse's shoulder, calming the reaction with nothing more than presence. "It's okay," Noah murmured. "I'm right here." Emma watched, breath caught somewhere between fear and wonder. "On 3, Noah said quietly. "You lift. I guide." He wasn't speaking to the ranch hands. He was speaking to Ashfall. The wind howled, snow stung the skin, and then, "1," Noah whispered. Ashfall's muscles tightened. 2. The storm swallowed the word. 3. Ashfall heaved upward with a groan that sounded like the earth tearing open. Noah pushed against the rocks with all his small strength, shifting their angle just enough for the horse's leg to slip free. Ashfall staggered. Noah stumbled. Snow burst around them in a white explosion. Then, impossibly, Ashfall didn't bolt. He didn't rear. He didn't collapse. He lowered himself, slowly, as if bowing, to allow Noah to reach his back. "Noah," Emma gasped. Even Calder took a half-step forward, disbelief freezing him in place. "No," he whispered. "That can't," but it was happening. Ashfall stayed still, offering himself in a way no one had ever seen him do. Noah climbed onto him with the gentleness of someone climbing into a memory. Ashfall rose beneath him, battered but steady. The storm shrieked its fury as horse and boy turned toward the ranch, silhouettes carved against the shifting white. "Noah!" Calder shouted, voice breaking. "Don't! It's too dangerous out there!" But Noah looked back only once. "I'm bringing him home," he said simply. The wind swallowed the words, but the meaning stayed. Ashfall stepped forward, hooves sinking deep into the snow. Noah leaned into his mane, guiding him through the blizzard. Behind them, the ranch hands stood stunned. Emma lifted a hand to her mouth. Calder's expression cracked open, fear, awe, grief, and something else trembling in his eyes. As Noah and Ashfall disappeared into the white, Emma whispered into the storm, "He's doing the impossible." And Calder, for the first time in years, didn't deny it. For a long stretch of time, the storm swallowed everything: sound, shape, color, even the sense of distance. Noah clung low against Ashfall's neck, his fingers twisted into the horse's mane as they forged through the whiteout. The world was no longer a place of fences and fields. It was a shifting dream, a void of swirling frost. Only the rhythmic rise and fall of Ashfall's breath grounded Noah, each exhale a soft pulse of warmth against the ruthless cold. Ashfall stepped carefully despite his injury, placing his hooves with a precision that felt almost deliberate, as if he were protecting not just himself, but the boy who trusted him without hesitation. Snow stung Noah's cheeks, and his vision blurred from the icy wind, but he could still feel the steady strength beneath him. "We're close," Noah whispered, though he had no real way of knowing. The storm muted everything, but something in Ashfall's posture, some old instinct born long before humans put fences on the land, guided them back toward the ranch. A faint glow began to bloom ahead. Lantern light. Swaying. Fragile. But real. Noah blinked through the blur. The shapes of men and horses and wooden posts slowly emerged from the storm. Calder stood at the center of them, coat whipping violently behind him, lantern raised high. His breath fogged the air, his eyes searching with a desperation he hadn't allowed himself to show in years. When he finally saw Noah riding out of the storm on Ashfall's back, his lantern lowered an inch. His face didn't change at first. He seemed frozen, carved into the blizzard like part of the land itself. But the rigidness in his shoulders slackened, and a deep, unseen heaviness slipped through him like something he'd been carrying too long. Emma let out a sound, half gasp, half relief, and ran toward them. The ranch hands murmured in disbelief. Not one of them had imagined this outcome. Not with Ashfall, not with the storm, not with a boy like Noah. Noah slid off Ashfall's back the moment they reached the clearing. His legs buckled from exhaustion, but he steadied himself, pressing a hand against Ashfall's neck. Snow clung to his hair, his eyelashes, his jacket. "He needs warmth," Noah said, voice hoarse, "and a vet." But he walked the whole way. He didn't fall. Calder moved toward them slowly, lantern trembling slightly in his grip. He stopped right in front of Noah, staring not at the horse, but at the boy. This small, soaked figure who had gone into the storm for something that wasn't even his. "Hugh," Calder breathed. The word barely left his throat. "You brought him back." It wasn't praise. It wasn't shock. It was something far more meaningful. Recognition. Calder reached out, hand shaking, and placed it gently on Ashfall's neck. The horse flinched, but didn't shy away. His breathing steadied, steam rising from his nostrils in heavy bursts. Snow melted slowly along his black coat, Calder swallowed. His voice, when it came, was thin. "My son." He didn't finish. But Noah understood. And for the first time since meeting Calder, he saw not the wealthy rancher or the stern authority, but a father, cracked open by memory. Emma's father approached quietly, assessing Ashfall's injuries. "It's not as bad as it could be," he said. "If we get him inside and warmed up, he'll have a fighting chance." "Let's go," Calder said. He turned to Noah. Not in command, in invitation. Together, they guided Ashfall through the thinning storm toward the barn. Snow softened under their feet, and the wind eased, the sky slowly tiring of its own fury. As they walked, Noah felt something settle inside him. Not triumph, not pride, but a quieter reassurance, the kind that sits deep and steady like retirement planning for the soul. A sense of having walked through something defining. Inside the barn, lanterns glowed warmly against the wooden walls. Horses in nearby stalls watched with calm, dark eyes as Ashfall was led inside, where thick layers of straw and heavy blankets waited. Emma hurried to fetch warm water, while her father checked the injured leg more thoroughly. Calder knelt beside Ashfall. This towering man brought low not by force, but by truth. His hand rested on the horse's shoulder, fingers trembling against the powerful frame. "You should have died out there," he whispered, voice cracking. "Both of you." Noah sat quietly on a bale of hay, watching. He didn't interrupt. He didn't speak. He simply existed in the quiet, the way someone stays beside a friend who's grieving but needs no words. Calder finally turned his head toward Noah. "There was a time," he said slowly, "when I thought a horse like him could never be trusted again. Never forgiven. I blamed him for something that wasn't his fault, and I punished him by holding on to that blame." Noah said nothing. He didn't need to. Calder looked away, eyes glistening faintly in the shadowed light. "But he trusted you, more than he ever trusted me." A pause, a breath, the kind that changes a man. "You earned a place here tonight," he said softly, "and I won't forget that." The words seemed to ripple through the barn. Emma peeked up from her work. Even the ranch hands exchanged glances, the kind that acknowledge something larger than themselves. Noah lowered his gaze. "I didn't do anything special," he murmured. Calder shook his head, a tired, almost tender smile at the edge of his mouth. "Everything you did was special." A long silence followed, the healing kind, the kind that lets grief breathe without drowning everything it touches. Ashfall shifted, letting out a low, warm rumble. His eyes met Noah's once more, steady and soft, with none of the wild fear they once carried. The connection was unmistakable now. Two wounded beings who had found a place where their hurts aligned and began to loosen. Emma's father stood, wiping his hands. "He'll be all right with rest." Noah exhaled, shoulders finally relaxing. Calder looked at him with a sincerity that felt unfamiliar, even to him. "Stay with him tonight if you want. I'll make sure no one questions it." Noah nodded. Emma smiled softly from across the barn, her eyes bright with relief. As the last winds of the storm faded outside, a different kind of calm took its place, a calm that came not from safety, but from connection, the kind that didn't erase pain, but honored it. Inside that barn, the future felt unfamiliar, But for the first time, it didn't feel frightening. It felt open, quiet, and maybe even hopeful, like a breath that reaches all the way to the bottom of the lungs. Ashfall lowered his head toward Noah's hand, and Noah whispered, "You're home." The storm spent the rest of the night fading into itself, losing its fury hour by hour, until only a soft, exhausted quiet remained. By the time the first hint of morning crept into the sky, the ranch lay under a smooth blanket of snow, untouched, pristine, as if the world had chosen to forget everything from the night before. Inside the barn, lanterns had long since dimmed to thin glows. Most of the ranch hands had gone home to rest. Emma and her father slept in a corner wrapped in wool blankets, their breathing steady. Calder sat on an overturned bucket near Ashfall's stall, elbows on his knees, head bowed. Not asleep, but in that strange state between memory and thought where time slows down. Noah sat beside Ashfall, his back leaning gently against the horse's warm side. He had been there all night, drifting in and out of shallow sleep, waking each time Ashfall shifted. The boy's jacket was still damp, but the blanket Calder had handed him hours earlier helped ward off the chill. Ashfall, too, radiated a steady warmth, the warmth of a creature alive and recovering. When Noah finally stirred, blinking at the pale gold seeping through the cracks in the wooden boards, he found Calder watching him. The man didn't speak at first. He only nodded, a gesture that felt like a quiet recognition between two people who had survived something together. "How's he doing?" Calder asked softly. "Better," Noah said, rubbing sleep from his eyes. "He slept. He's not shaking anymore." Calder glanced at Ashfall, something shifting behind his expression. Something old. Something he had avoided confronting for too many years. He stood slowly, stretching stiff muscles, then walked to the edge of the stall. When he reached out a hand, Ashfall didn't flinch. Instead, the horse turned his head slightly, acknowledging him with a slow, heavy blink. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet. But it was the beginning of something close. Noah watched the exchange, feeling a tightness ease inside him. The barn was quiet in a way that had nothing to do with silence. It was quiet the way a wound becomes quiet after it finally stops bleeding. Emma yawned loudly as she woke, rubbing her eyes. "Morning," she mumbled, then blushed when she realized both Noah and Calder were awake. Her father stirred too, stretching until his joints popped. "He made it through the worst," he said, glancing at Ashfall's bandaged leg. "With rest and the right long-term care, he'll heal fine." Calder nodded slowly, as if absorbing the truth not just of the injury, but of everything that had led them here. "Good," he murmured. "That's good." Emma looked at Noah, her expression softening. "You stayed all night?" Noah shrugged. "I didn't want him to wake up alone." The answer seemed to land somewhere deep in Calder. He exhaled, his breath shaky but controlled. "You did more than anyone could have asked," he said. "More than I ever expected." Noah shifted uncomfortably, unused to praise. "I just didn't want him to be scared." "Sometimes," Calder said quietly, "we help others in ways we wish someone had helped us." Noah's chest tightened at the truth in those words. He didn't look away, but his eyes softened, the way a leaf softens in warm water. The barn door creaked as a light breeze pushed it open, letting in the crisp smell of morning snow. The storm clouds were gone, leaving a sky washed clean, blue, fragile, almost shy. The world outside glittered with sunlight striking untouched snow, each flake catching the light like tiny shards of glass. Emma stepped outside first, boots crunching softly. "It's beautiful," she whispered. Noah followed, blinking into the brightness. The cold brushed his cheeks gently now, no longer the punishing cold of the night before. The pastures stretched wide, blanketed in white, the fences casting long blue shadows across the snow. He turned when he felt movement behind him. Ashfall limped out slowly, guided by Calder and Emma's father. His steps were careful, steady, each one placed with deliberate precision. When Ashfall reached Noah, he stopped, lowering his massive head until it nearly touched the boy's shoulder. Noah rested a hand against the horse's cheek. "Morning," he whispered. Ashfall's breath puffed against him, warm and steady. Calder watched them, his face unreadable for a moment. Then he spoke softly, a rarity for him. "You changed him," he said. "Changed both of us." Noah didn't respond. He didn't know how. Instead, he kept stroking Ashfall's cheek, letting the morning sun warm his cold fingers. Calder approached slowly, stepping beside Noah. "If you want," he said, voice lower now, "you can come to the ranch whenever you like. No more sneaking in. No more worrying about getting in trouble." Noah looked up. The offer was simple, but it struck him deeply, as if someone had opened a door inside his life he didn't know was there. "Really?" he asked. Calder nodded. "Really?" Emma grinned, cheeks pink from the cold. "Told you he picked you?" Calder shot her a look, but it softened before it fully formed. Noah turned his eyes back to Ashfall. "Thank you," he whispered, not sure whether he was thanking the horse or the man beside him. Maybe both. Maybe neither. Maybe the world for letting him keep something fragile and precious. Ashfall shifted closer, brushing Noah gently. It wasn't a grand gesture, not a dramatic sign, just a small, quiet acceptance. A sound like a sigh escaped Noah's chest. Calder stepped back, letting the sunlight fall over the boy and the horse. "Take him for a walk," he said. "Slow, just far enough to let him breathe." Noah nodded. They walked together through the fresh snow, boy and horse side by side, leaving a gentle trail behind them. The air was filled with a stillness that felt almost sacred, as if the land itself were honoring this fragile peace. Noah didn't talk. Ashfall didn't need words. The morning didn't demand anything more than steps taken in quiet harmony. And when Noah finally turned back toward the barn, he paused for one last look at the valley, now washed in gold and white, the storm erased as if forgiven. It struck him then, not like a revelation, but like a breath he had been holding for years. He wasn't alone anymore, not in the world, not in himself. He pressed his forehead lightly to Ashfall's muzzle. The horse closed his eyes, exhaling into the still morning. No music, no applause, no sound at all. Just the soft pulse of two hearts, finally finding a place to rest. And the day began in silence. If this story touched something quiet inside you, let me know in the comments. Just a few words, or even a simple, "I'm here," is enough. Your voice means more than you think. And if you'd like to walk with me through the next story of hope, healing, and the bond between people and animals, feel free to like this video and subscribe. I'd be honored to have you with us for the journeys ahead.